Thank you, Mateo, Colonel Greer. Thank you. And, we will now move on to our next panelist, who is Lieutenant Colonel Grant Martin. He is an active service officer of the U.S. Army, currently assigned to the Joint Special Operations Command. He's also an SAMS, that is Expert Planner, just as Colonel Greer. You can see his career there on the slide. You can see his curriculum. And as we said at the beginning, he is currently following a PhD. Colonel Grant Martin is a good friend of Colombia, as we met back in Toronto in 2016. Welcome back, sir, to Colombia, even if it's virtually. I understand he will surprise us with his Spanish today. So, sir, you have the floor.
General Puentes, General Ocampo, General San Miguel, Coronel Rojas, otros distinguidos invitados y compañeros oficiales.
And to all the official peers, thanks you very much for inviting me to talk to you about warfare and the use of design. And that way we can help in our understanding of war. I am the Lieutenant Colonel Grant Martin, allocated to space operations for the special operations in the United States. I was assigned to the 7th group of special services. I love my time in Colombia, and that was kind of 19 years ago. Today, I'd like to talk to you about the tension between the regular war and the irregular war from design perspective. I don't think that design can solve all of our problems in order to understand the warfare, but I think that design may help us to discover new ways of thinking. I think that the point of Dr. Ofra Gracier about the logic of the system it's very important. Colonel Greer, Cambio. Pregunta que cómo se dice change, cambio. El cambio de organizaciones, the change of organizations, and those are very, very important points. So I'm going to mention some of the ways how we can change our logic and also the organizational thinking. This is the agenda for my talk. So, what is the regular war? What is the irregular war? Why this dichotomy? The purpose of the categoric thinking. And we need to break that dichotomic and categoric thinking? Are there more options? And an example, finally. I need to apologize in advance. I haven't used my Spanish much since 2002. And I was in Colombia for the last time. That was 2002, so any question needs to be translated to English, please. Talking about my time in Colombia, I remember that my sergeant of intelligence one day said to me while we were in Bogotá that in his opinion, the problem wasn't one of the South America, was one of the United States. Because the drug demand was coming from the United States. I frequently think that our non-commissioned officers are thinking more on design, even more than what we do. Because that was a way of seeing the things in a different way versus most of the officers I had spoken before. And I think that design is all about that. Design is about thinking in a different way. It is to try to see the situation again in a different manner versus how everyone else is seeing it. And in that way, we can create different ways of doing things. Thanks. Okay. What is the regular warfare? At least 4 things.
No.
One, the army and all the soldiers are dressing the same uniforms. The second, an organized army receiving orders from the political leaders. Third, an army using conventional tactics. And fourth, the destruction of the enemy force, that's the objective. And I think that the most important thing of all is the last one. The fourth one is the most important for this regular warfare. Now, there are potentially more ways on how the regular war is different from the irregular one. But I wanted to mention some of the ones I thought were the more common ones. So, what is the irregular warfare? What is irregular warfare? In a similar way, I am presenting here 4 items. 1, no uniform or no uniformity. Second, non-organized armed forces. They're not receiving direct orders from the political leaders. So it is more informal for these irregular forces. And the third one, non-conventional tactics. And the last one, the objective is to survive of the enemy force. That's their objective. Again, maybe that one is the most important one. Why that dichotomy? This between the regular war and the irregular one. Humans normally like to think in terms of one or the other, in terms that this or that.
Bueno contra malo.
Black or white, good versus evil, as an example. And this clarified the things and allowed us to think in an easier way.
También oculta matices.
And also is hiding some colors, exceptions, color or gray areas. But the reality is not like that. The reality is not like a dichotomy one, because dichotomy allows the reductive thinking and our favorite thinking option. And that reduces the complexity to something simple. Can you really reduce all the complex things to simple ones? My understanding of the theory of complexity is that we cannot reduce all the things to a simplistic one. Complex matters are not of this reduction type. And the purpose of this category thinking. We organize thinking around categories. Categoric thinking can be found in different areas, but normally is linked to the physics, science, and something that's solid, or gas or liquid, for example. Humans think in terms of metaphors, metaphoric thinking. We try to find similar things to what we are experiencing, and then we think that we understand it. In the United States Army, I think that our favorite metaphor is the gravity center concept. Treupunkt in German. Developed first by von Clausewitz. Many United States Army officers believe that there is a gravity center for war. And also, they think that there is a gravity center for the matter. But that's just metaphor. One way of thinking of something abstract, and that's a problem. It is a problem to understand the situation if we don't understand that that concept is a metaphor. Also, it is important when we need to change our metaphors. So, what's wrong with this categoric and dichotomic thinking? For war, I think that's not enough. Warfare is both physical and social. Created by phenomena that are driven the study of the physical matter and other social phenomena. However, the majority of the military metaphors are physical, and that's another problem for me. In the United States, when we were establishing our universities, that was the time of the French Illustration. We established the exclusion way of thinking of the illustration to include a big dependency on the reductive thinking. Engineering solutions to every problem and the scientific method applied to every situation. So we believe that knowledge will only be obtained measuring data and testing. And decisions will be made better in a rational way. Even the military academy at West Point started as an engineering school. Ingeniería. Which means that our metaphors weren't only physical, the majority were only physical, but also we never create them as metaphors. What other options we have? The easiest one is to extend our metaphors to include social concepts.
Sociologists don't categorize this in a dichotomy, but rather they see things through a continuum. Another tool that sociologists use is to imagine a continuum of quadrants. Two sets of opposing attributes facing other two sets of opposing attributes. Yet another action is to look at the systems theory a theory of complex adaptive systems. For instance, the Ganaban framework, you can see on the right. Another action is to consider every situation as its own unique situation, also known as ideographic actions. There are other ways of understanding war. Perhaps a better way is to use multiple tools, or at least understand the good and the bad of each before deciding upon one or the other. The key idea, however, is to be able to influence a way in which an organization understands things. If an organization only uses one method for understanding, then not necessarily will it be a good one to understand. It will be perhaps good to communicate as it has understood, to communicate what it has understood. And that is important, but it is not the most important. There is a tension between understanding the situation and being able to communicate. This is one of the paradoxes of war. The more understanding your unit has on something, the more or the harder will it be to convey that to those who are outside this effort of outreach. So you need to balance out this need of understanding, but also that of communicating. What's most important at the end of the day is to win, right? But understand that winning is a socially determined concept. And the understanding of social determinations requires the understanding of multiple stances or multiple points of view. Next, please. So an example, in 2010, I worked at the headquarters of a training mission of NATO training mission in Kabul, Afghanistan, and the planning section. General Stan McChrystal was working in a new strategy. We were working on how to better train the police, the army, under this new strategy. We started out by trying to understand the situation. Why do we have so much trouble with the police, the army, and people from Afghanistan? We decided that we were not fighting against insurgency. The Taliban were not the insurgents, but rather we reached the conclusion that we were the insurgents and that the Taliban were fighting against the government that we had installed. We thought that managing ourselves or looking at ourselves as insurgents could help us change our strategy. Of course, this was not precisely appropriate. The government that we were supporting was in power, and although we created the cause for a major part of that problem. So it's not that we were actually the insurgents, but we were both. We were both the insurgents and supporting the then in power government. That entailed that we had to face each other, or rather face ourselves, playing both roles. However, unfortunately, General McChrystal was fired right before we were able to talk to him. And so General Petraeus came in, and we were told nothing would change. Even so, looking back, I believe that if we had tried to look at ourselves as insurgents instead of Taliban as insurgents, that might have helped us. Now, of course, the Taliban has recovered control of the country. The key idea here was that we could have pictured ourselves as the insurgents supporting government instead of one and the other. This story is also coming to a broader matter. This matter or issue is that our doctrine was written like that, categorically. We fight as per our doctrine as counterinsurgents. Or, to be more accurate, we were helping the Afghan security forces to do counterinsurgency, or to fight as if they were counterinsurgents. And our doctrine assigned the Taliban as insurgents. However, instead of telling ourselves how we could think about our own situation, our doctrine could have led to helping us understand the situation from multiple perspectives. Perhaps one such perspective could have been that of the Taliban. Another one could have been Pakistan. Yet another one could have been the different tribes from Afghanistan. But our doctrine made things easy for us. We were counterinsurgency, and all those who we fought were the insurgents. Therefore, design thinking would lead us to thinking critically about the situation in which we were immersed and all the unique forms that this situation was or is different from others. Our doctrine should not compel us to think about one single point of view. Tensions between regular warfare and irregular warfare are not real tensions in an objective sense. These are tensions with respect to the limitations of human nature. One is that tension between how to understand situations in all their complexity and the need to communicate things to many people as simply as it is possible. Another one is how we should organize ourselves and fight for our culture or based on our culture, and how we must also organize ourselves and fight based on the situation. So our culture and the situation. Another tension is between that need for control and the need to allow initiative in warfare. There are many different tensions, and if a design approach can help us discover these tensions and not see them as an option, an alternative between one thing or the other, but rather as different forms or different ways of viewing war. We have the option of ignoring these tensions, or were we able to recognize them and tap into the ideas that they allow us, which could give us a better, nuanced, and richer version of a situation, which could lead to more creative ideas on how to deal with the situation. Thank you. Also, as I'm still an army member, I cannot comment on public affairs, just so you know. Thank you, and these are all my standpoints, my points of view, and not necessarily those of the Special Operations Command of the United States, nor of the U.S. Army as a whole. I apologize for my broken Spanish, and it's not good enough to listen to your questions in Spanish or nor to answer them in Spanish. So I will please ask you to help me out with translation. So any questions or comments? Thank you, Grant. Please give Grant a round of applause for his great effort in speaking our Spanish. That's very special for us. Thank you, Grant. So before we move on to a Q&A, I would like to offer some thoughts. I will speak slowly because I was running and Daniel had a hard time. It was my fault, in fact. Sorry, Daniel. So it's very important because Grant is talking about a dichotomy between what's regular and what's irregular. And I feel it's very interesting that he talks about social and physical warfare. And this social war is what we understand in Colombia or Latin America, our hemisphere, as the non-armed or unarmed war.
My name is Daniel, and I'm going to be translating for Colonel Rojas. What Colonel Rojas is basically saying is that you basically point out a dichotomy based on irregular and irregular warfare that we are handling right now.
And this unarmed war we can see in the case of some violent demonstrations in our country that have proven what Colonel Grant was just saying.
And it points out the non-armed, the irregular warfare that we're seeing right now. And this is mostly evident in the Colombian case with the social protests that we've witnessed since the 28th of April.
And if you can see, Grant used two words that are very much connected: doctrine and design. Design and doctrine. As I said before, the Colombian military forces are studying design. And that's very important to understand these BUCA environments.
Essential words that are doctrine and design. And, ¿qué más? Sorry.
Sí, que ya Ya lo incorporamos a nuestra doctrina.
And we have incorporated that in our doctrine in Colombia.
And that's very important to understand the complex BUCA environments. Okay, and to enclose and move on to other questions, I will start this session with a question, because I feel that this tension or dichotomy that Grant was mentioning, the Army incorporated in its doctrine a concept that is that of mission command, which is an exercise in leadership, in authority, where high commander entitles the subordinate commander to make decisions. It's a philosophy of leadership, if I'm allowed, I would say it's groundbreaking, but it weights trust, critical creative thinking, and it trains agile, adaptable leaders who are the ones who make decisions in the front lines, but it does not, they never stray from the intentions of their higher command. So they have the what and they have a what and the how they do develop. So then comes the question. Please don't translate this all. I was just wanted to give you some context. The question is for Grant, and you will have translation. Do you believe that mission command would help work out this tension, this dichotomy between regular and irregular warfare?
Do you think that the mission command helps in the resolution of the tension and the dichotomy between regular and irregular warfare?
So I think mission command is definitely something that can help or hurt. And in my opinion, it has to be different depending on what kind of war you're involved in. And so if the doctrine says this is the way to do mission command always, then, and even if the doctrine allows some flexibility, if the way that the commander communicates to subordinates and subordinates communicate to the commander, and the way that the command controls operations and units, if all that really doesn't change very much, then it potentially will undermine the mission. And I would give one example in a paper that was written, and off the top of my head, I can't remember the title. I'll have to look it up for you and give it to you. But the author was a Special Forces colonel who said that if there are more headquarters and more media and more politicians interested in an irregular warfare effort, that mission command will be affected in a negative way and actually undermine success. And so I think it's a very interesting balance of how do you control operations and units when sometimes our normal ways of controlling would undermine the mission. So I think a design approach would be to design the mission command based on the needs of the mission But of course, as Dr. Gracier said, sometimes the politics doesn't allow that. So when that is the case, I think the military has to acknowledge that and deal with it instead of ignoring it.
Grant, ¿tenemos las preguntas, Daniel?
Of course, sí, mi coronel. Of course.
Primero en español, por favor.
Claro que sí. Aquí me preguntan, desde su perspectiva y teniendo en cuenta el ejemplo que usted acaba de resaltar, ¿cuál puede ser ese doble rol que el ejército de Colombia puede tener en el desarrollo del conflicto armado? Colonel, from your perspective and taking into account the example that you have just raised, what can be that double role that the Colombian Army can have in the development of the armed conflict?
So very, very wide question, but I think one answer would be to reflect on how the Colombian Army measures success. And so when you're talking regular warfare in the American Army, we will oftentimes go to our training center, and the measure of success is whether the brigade can set up a headquarters element in the field, a tactical control element, whether it will be able to communicate to its subordinate units, the battalions, and whether they did all of these steps of controlling operations, and then whether they were able to defeat the enemy. And that works for regular warfare type battles. But then if you are using those same types of ways of learning and ways of measuring success when you're dealing more with an irregular warfare situation where it's harder to measure, or you can't measure everything, it's more of a social situation, then I think the answer is to try and change the way that your units train and learn and then measure their success. Or maybe they don't measure their success. Maybe it's more of an art. Maybe there's more of an interpretation and subjective types of tools to gauge success and that sort of thing. So that would be one way I would recommend any army to change a little bit if they are involved in an irregular warfare. That more social piece is more difficult to do, but it's more important as well.
Okay.
Thank you, Grant. Thank you very much. I think that we're having some issues with the video. So, Grant, can you hear us? Oh, good, you're back. You were frozen. Daniel, next question, please. Have you considered what happened in Afghanistan with the American troops? Is that a symptom of the hegemonic power?
Do you consider that what happened in Afghanistan with the withdrawal of U.S. troops is a symptom of the weakness of an hegemonic power?
Well, trying to stay away from the political side of
No
things.
entender.
I would say it is a very good example of when the political objective will dictate what the operations are allowed to do. And so that is something that the military, I know in my career, we've struggled with mightily. And I talked to my father and others who fought in Vietnam and others who fought in other places. And when it's more of an irregular type of situation where you're not trying to defeat an enemy militarily, but you're trying to accomplish another type of mission, then often, or maybe always, the political objective is really the logic. Going back to what Dr. Ofra Grasir was talking about, the political environment really becomes the logic of the situation. And military people like myself, we like to try and ignore that and focus in on the military problem. But again, looking at how sociologists try to make sense of things, we have to take into account the logic of the political objectives. And it's very difficult to do that because most politicians will be punished if they are honest. So you can't just ask them or read what they say. You have to do some critical thinking and try and figure out what is really going on. And that logic should help to make more sense of the military mission. And I would say that that's a very difficult thing to do for the military because we kind of want to ignore the political objectives.
Thank you, Grant. Is there any other question? The last one. We have three. Let me see. I think that we have time for two only.
Well, there's this question.
How can we have another option or a disruptive perspective in order to understand the role of the Colombian army under the context of the peace accord, after the peace accords?
So I actually learned a lot about disruptive thinking from Dr. Ofra Grasir. So I will channel her insights when I answer this. But I think anytime something has changed and an organization is trying to make sense of things, it is very easy to fall back to what the organization normally uses and to try and come up with some new way of thinking or new insights or challenge the conventional wisdom is very, very difficult. And again, that kind of channels Colonel Greer's points as well, that organizational change is very different. And so I think design can help in trying to disrupt the old ways of thinking, particularly when the situation has changed and you need that new way of thinking. But again, going to Colonel Greer's points, this is very, very difficult. And so design, I think when it's done very well, encourages the commander to question the organization and the commander's way of viewing things as well. It takes humility, intellectual humility, and it takes a willingness to admit that we are wrong. And so I think that is one of the key points of design, that design can offer some type of disruption from the normal way of thinking if the organization thinks it needs to do that. And even when the organization doesn't think they need to do it, that's a lot of times the time they do need to do it. And so at that point, if the commander isn't necessarily wanting to hear disruptive thinking, there's usually a need for it sometimes, and someone has to do it. So that becomes a tricky thing. Who does it? And then how do you get it into the thinking of the commander and the unit? And there's a lot of different ways. The U.S. Army has something called red teaming. Some units use it and use it very well, but it's this idea of questioning, constantly questioning. I've seen units do it very informally. So having an informal group that meets outside of the norm, maybe for dinner or cervezas, and tries to think different, and then go back to work and inject it later.
To enclose, I want to share with you what Grant is currently saying. Those red teams, we have them in our doctrine, and those are teams that are their goal is to be questioning, and allow me to say it that way. They are against the commander, against the major state, but the goal is to, in a disruptive manner, bring some questions to make the right results. In doctrine, and we have some officers from the Air Force. Thank you, Colonel Gaitan, Director of the Postgraduate Air Force, close here to our university. My General Campo, Director of the IEGAP, General of the Air Force. So I want to invite all the Army officers. The National Police is present here. Consult art and operational art and design of the Army. And there you're going to find the red teams. What is their goal of questioning, and how important it is sometime in a major stage to have that discussion. Grant was saying that we can do it in a formal way or an informal way, and we also call it an RTA, after action. Normally, we question what happened, how we can improve the operation, what went wrong. But what Grant is saying right now, and I want to invite you all to analyze what those red teams are, and that's included in the Army doctrine. So thanks, Colonel Grant, very much. An applause. Oh, well, very good. Thanks, my Colonel.